Have you ever wanted to get involved in real estate development, but didn't know where to begin? Do you think real estate development is only for the large hedge funds or major corporations, the big guys? Or have you done some development in the past and are looking to scale up? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to the W.I.R.E.D Wealth and Real Estate Development Podcast. I am your host, Nick Smith. Get ready to have your mind blown and rewired as we discuss all aspects of creating wealth and real estate development. All righty. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone that is listening. Again, this is another episode of W.I.R.E.D Wealth and Real Estate Development. This is where we build wealthy families, wealthy communities, and wealthy individuals through real estate development. I am your host, Nicholas Smith, and it is indeed a pleasure for us to be here with you. And if you are listening to this, a happy new year to you, because we are now in 2024. So it is truly a blessing to see another year. Definitely, as always, if you all are getting any value out of this content, if you like the content, please like, share, subscribe. I'm on all platforms where podcasts are listened to. So download the episodes that you enjoy, that you like, and I definitely would appreciate you sharing to help this podcast grow. For sure. We recently reached about 250 to 300 downloads. So I definitely want to thank you all that have been supporting the podcast, and we're just going to keep this thing moving and keep it growing. Today, we do have a special guest. Rick Wajda is the executive director the Indiana Homebuilders Association. Rick and I met probably about a year or so ago. I went down to Indianapolis for one of the legislative meetings for the Indiana Homebuilders Association. And he actually came back up to our area recently to speak at an event here in Hammond, Indiana. And I definitely shared with him that I wanted to bring him on to the show so he could share his experience, his knowledge, and expertise in this industry. So Rick, how are you doing this morning, sir?
Excellent. Thanks for having me on, Nicholas.
Oh, no, I appreciate you being here. For my listeners that, of course, do not know you, please give us a Cliff Notes version of your background, your experience, how you got to where you are, and just give us a little bit into who you are.
Sure. I started in the career in the mid-90s, was a graduate of Butler University in Indianapolis, and through their business school, they require students to do internships in order to graduate, and I got my start with the Builders Association in Greater Indianapolis, assisting on their home shows and parade of homes. I took a liking to the construction industry, and they appeared to like me as well, and so I stuck around with them. And then in 1996, I moved over to the state association in member services, and from there, moved up into a role as their governmental affairs director and lobbyist in the late 90s, and did that for a couple of years, and then left in 2002, went to work for the major oil industry that have assets in the state of Indiana, like the BP Whiting refinery up in your neck of the woods. Yeah. And did that for 2 years, and then came back in the end of 2004 to the Homebuilders Association, and have been the CEO since the end of 2005.
Got you. And I correct myself. You're the CEO, not the executive director, CEO.
Yeah, no problem.
I got you. So BP industry, I didn't know you had that oil background. What exactly did you do for BP?
Yeah, so BP was one of our clients. I worked for the American Petroleum Institute. And so companies like BP and Marathon and Shell and ExxonMobil that all have assets in the state of Indiana. So we represented them in front of the Indiana General Assembly and on legislative and regulatory issues.
Wow. Okay. And for those of you all who may not be familiar with the reference point that he gave, Whiting, Indiana, which is in my backyard, has a huge plant, a huge BP tank farm, for lack of better words. It really kind of borders Whiting and East Chicago, but yeah, that's right. And we actually have a ton of oil refineries and companies in our local area. Some may kind of see that as a threat with the amount of oil tanks that we have, but that's a different story for a different day.
Right.
So I know that you started off in the association with the Home Builders Association. First of all, tell us in your words, what is the Indiana Home Builders Association and kind of what role does it play, in the new build or new construction environment?
Sure. For your listeners, maybe not familiar with the organization, we're a nonprofit trade association that represents the residential and light commercial construction industry across the state of Indiana. So we have about 2,700 member companies across the state, and about a third of those are actual home builders, remodelers, and developers. And then about 2/3 of those members are suppliers, subcontractors, trade partners, vendors that provide a product and or service to the residential light commercial construction industry. So we're the voice of the residential construction industry. Started in 1952 when some builders from across the state said we need to have a voice at the state capitol, and we can't step away from our businesses every day when the lawmakers and regulatory officials are considering whether it's a proposed law or a regulation that's going to impact the home building industry. We can't drive from all across the state to talk to our legislators, and we need to have a voice there on a day-to-day basis. And so the state association was created, and we've continued that mission to advocate on behalf of not only our members, but also on behalf of homeowners and potential homeowners across the state of Indiana to make sure that we keep housing safe and affordable across the state and across the country. We're affiliated with the National Association of Home Builders, and we work very closely with them, as well as our 20 local chapters all across the state of Indiana to keep housing safe and affordable.
Right, right. No, how important is it from your viewpoint? Because I heard you mention remodelers, people, quote unquote, your fix and flippers, what some people call them, but remodelers as well as new home builders. How important is it for people that are interested in, you know, exploring careers in those industries, or even people that are in those industries currently? How important is it for them to be, somewhat familiar and up to date with what's going on with their local regulations or statewide regulations?
Sure. Right. It's an ever changing industry. And so there's constantly new building code requirements that are coming out that builders have to adhere to. There's also local regulations that impact whether you're building a new home or remodeling a home, that the company, the builder, the remodeler, or the trade partner has to be cognizant of. And so we feel very strongly that we have to have knowledge is key in any industry, and certainly as leaders in the residential construction industry, we try to provide that information to our members so that they can build a quality product and make sure that they're getting those projects done on time and under the current laws and regulations that are in place.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I always emphasize on my show how important, your local laws and statewide law, even national, you know, this industry is law intensive. That is just the reality of it. And
Right.
you have to, really kind of, I won't say immerse yourself. You don't have to look at stuff on a day-to-day basis, but you have to get involved and you have to know, what's going on. You can't bury your head in the sand, which is what I see a lot of people do, in the industry. So
Yeah, I was going to say there are a lot of small business owners, right? And small business owners get
right.
pulled in a million different directions every day, and from keeping projects on time and making sure all their subcontractors, vendors are in the right places, and managing employees. And so we try to help on the business end of that, just to make sure that if there are changes they need to be aware of, that we're getting that information out to them and try to help them, do what they do best, and that's building the American dream of home ownership for consumers all across the state.
Gotcha. And also, you don't necessarily have to just be a home builder or remodeler to be a part of the Home Builders Association, because you all do have affiliate members too. And can you explain what the affiliate memberships are?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we have, from real estate professionals to your local lumber company or window salesperson, lending institutions, title companies, attorneys that deal with residential real estate or land development. Anybody that really has that, an interest in moving a product or a service in the construction industry, we welcome them into our membership. And a lot of them are very engaged in professionals that really help the association move the ball forward.
Gotcha. We talked about the areas that the Home Builders Association kind of focuses on. You mentioned residential and light commercial. When you talk about residential, of course, I know that means your traditional single family home developments or even, one-off kind of, new builds, townhomes, things like that. But do you
Right.
all venture into also the advocacy areas around multifamily, or is that kind of a different arm, so to speak?
No, we have a lot of multifamily builders who build apartments all across the state of Indiana as well. And, certainly that sector of the industry right now is growing as home prices have continued to escalate, not only in Indiana, but all across the country, putting home ownership maybe out of reach for some. And so apartment living is another alternative that may be available for folks looking to live in a specific community or area of the state. And so we represent their interest as well. And we realize that, as consumer preferences also change, some people may not be interested in being a homeowner right away, and they prefer the type of living that apartment living gives them, or it's in an area that they want to live in. And so, we certainly want to be cognizant of that and make sure that we've got housing choices available at all price points and at all different product categories.
Right. No, I think that's key for any community to be viable. You can't have all luxury homes, though some residents may desire that and may want it, but you have to have housing options, for people of all incomes, all shapes, sizes, because that's what truly makes up a community is, people of different backgrounds, income levels, and that again, that's a point of argument in a lot of our communities nowadays. But that's the true definition of community for sure. And like you said, not everybody wants to be a homeowner right now. I had this argument. Now more so, I focus on commercial real estate as a broker, but when I was primarily a residential real estate broker, I used to have this argument with people, and they would say everybody should be a homeowner. That was what was touted. And I said, my rebuttal was always that, yeah, everybody can be a homeowner, but everybody does not want to be a homeowner, and everybody does not need to be a homeowner right now. There are different circumstances for different people. But when you talk about home ownership and the affordability, when you look at the national statistics of, how costly building a new home has really become, not just in the state of Indiana, but really kind of all over. I mean, right now in Indiana, I know in our area, I mean, most of your new homes are starting in the 400,000s. That's kind of where they're starting. You have some kind of more affordable, I would say lower end new construction, and not lower end in quality, just lower end and, somewhat design and features, things like that. They may be in kind of that 350 range, but typically speaking, your newer homes here in our area for sure are kind of in that 400,000. And yeah, that does knock a lot of people out. Outside of the affordability piece, what kind of are some of the challenges that you're seeing, on a state and even national level, with new construction in particular?
Yeah, I think, right, we, especially over the last few years and coming out of the COVID pandemic, there's been a lot of challenges to affordability. We've seen consolidation in the industry. There are not as many home builders engaged in building homes today as there was coming out of the last recession in the mid to late early 2000s. For example, our membership was over 7,000 members, companies across the state prior to the downturn. And, we dropped down into the mid 2000s, and, we've bounced back a little bit, but there's been a lot of consolidation. So there's less people, less companies building homes, and less subcontractors, plumbing, heating, HVAC contractors to go around, which slows down the process, makes the process longer, makes it more expensive because there's not as many contractors out there to do the work. And so, that's a huge challenge, and you mentioned it earlier, the average cost of a home in your area is around 400,000. That's the median new home price across the whole state of Indiana right now.
Wow.
And so if you think about that, the income needed to qualify for a mortgage at that median new home price of $400,000 is over $120,000 for a family. And we know that about 75% of Hoosier households can't afford the median new home price of a new home right now in Indiana. And so that's a challenge, right? Our members, our builders across the state are working very hard to try to bring that cost down to make it more affordable for Hoosiers to buy a new home if that's what they desire. And so what does bringing down the cost of a new home mean? That means maybe shrinking the footprint of the lot. That might mean smaller square footage. And that may mean less, features on the inside and outside of the home to try to bring that cost down to make sure the folks can afford it. And so that's an everyday challenge because you're balancing the cost of the house with what preferences your buyers want. Because at the end of the day, our builders have to build a house that somebody wants to buy. And if they're missing the mark on it, they're not going to be in business very long.
Right. No, that's 100% correct. And even, that's same in point even for rental housing. I mean, you still can't put anything up. I mean, people still, people want what they want. And there is such a delicate balance between cost, affordability, and preferences, because you want to build something that somebody wants to reside in, but it also, builders are not in it for charity. This is not a nonprofit business, so to speak, for your small businesses. That at the end of the day, they have to make a profit in order to sustain, so definitely has to be a balance between that. But you mentioned kind of that first challenge, and I want to touch on that a little bit. When you talk about there aren't as many builders as there once were, even remodelers, just people bringing new inventory, to the market. Of course, I was not in the industry or even around the industry in that 2008 kind of bubble where that situation happened. I was just graduating college, so I missed that whole thing. I saw the after effects, but I wasn't necessarily a participant, so I didn't know really what the housing market looked like then from a firsthand perspective. But I've heard from several people that were in the industry, during that time and then afterwards, how many builders just kind of closed the doors, never came back. A lot of them don't have a desire to come back. How do you think we get more people, especially I would say even our younger people, because kids coming out of high school, I don't think they really understand this career path is even an option, so to speak. A lot of them don't. I'll say that. But how do you think we can get more people involved in this industry, in the building new home industry?
Yep, it's a great question and a challenge that we're working on every day. A lot of our leaders have realized that it's a critical issue moving forward. And, housing demand is going to continue to be there. It's going to continue to grow over the next several decades, but because we've been underbuilding for so long in the state of Indiana, and across the country and in a lot of areas as well, but we've got to have the workers to do it. And I think we've spent the better part of a couple decades of telling our young children and other folks that, hey, you have to go to a 4-year college, you have to have a degree. And we really shifted the focus away from our career and technical education opportunities for kids to even get exposure to see if it's something that they're interested in. And we've got to get back to that. And I think we are. We've created a partnership with Indiana Construction Roundtable Foundation to talk about, it's a partnership with Build Your Future Indiana to talk about careers in the construction industry, whether it's residential, commercial, union, non-union, road building.
Right.
We need all of it, right? And so if we can get the exposure to those kids to say, if you want to go to a 4-year college, great. That's your career path. But know that there are other great opportunities available to you. And if you like working with your hands, if you like working outside, if you want to be a small business owner at some point, you can have a very rewarding career and make a very good living for you and your family if you're willing to learn a skilled trade. And here are the opportunities available to you. And so we're starting to make some very good headway over the last couple of years with our partnership with the Construction Roundtable Foundation. But it's got to be an all hands on deck approach. We've got to make sure that we're getting into the schools, we're getting in front of the students, we're getting in front of their parents to let them know that their little Johnny or their little Susie doesn't have to go to college if they don't want to, as long as they're willing to learn a skilled trade and they can have a very rewarding career.
Right. 100% no. And I totally agree. Our education system definitely moved away. When I look back at my uncles, who graduated high school in 70s, somewhere in there, they all had to take, some type of wood shop or woodworking classes in high school. They all had to do something, whether it was welding, carpentry, something. And one of my uncles is very gifted, in that area. He's gotten older, so he just doesn't do it as much. But when I look back, when I went through high school, I didn't get exposed to any of that in high school. We didn't have any of those, type of programs. Had a little bit of it in junior high, but high school was really where it would have connected.
Sure.
If I would have saw it, in high school. Granted, was I going to become a carpenter? Probably not. Probably not. But I would have at least known that that is a, kind of career path that somebody can go on. Our education system kind of, still, I think, pushes people in certain directions. Like you said, we push people to your 4-year universities, doctors, lawyers. We revere those type of careers. They get highly touted. Somebody's going to law school, somebody's going to medical school. We load them with praise, but we forget the doctor's gonna need somebody to work on the plumbing in their house. They're gonna need an electrician. They're gonna need somebody to do something, in their home. And we can't, disregard those type of trades, because it truly is, it's a drought in those trades right now. And that's why kind of the people that are in them right now can pretty much charge what they want to charge.
That's right.
They don't have a lot of competition.
Right. And then they can make a very good living doing it. And if they're good at their craft, they'll be in demand because there's just not enough of them out there. So, we just got to, make kids aware, young or adults that are looking at a career change as well, right? That are maybe went down a different career path or have struggled to find what they want to do with their lives, that, hey, if you're willing to work, there can be a very good light at the end of the tunnel for what your career objectives are.
No, 100%. Definitely agree with that, for sure, for sure. Mention, of course, the access of contractors being one challenge. Then we also have the affordability piece. The affordability piece is something that has been highly talked about, in the last several years. But it's one of those things, people talk about it a lot, but there's not a lot of action to solve it, because and granted, affordability is based on a household. So what's affordable for one household may not be affordable for the next household. But the statistic that you gave it's alarming. If a new home is $400,000 or more, but 75% of a state don't make enough money, 75% of households don't make enough money to even afford that presents a challenge. That presents a very big challenge, because that means that home prices are going up faster than our income levels can keep up. What kind of is your, I know none of us have a crystal ball. we don't know what's coming. We don't know what's coming down the pipeline, but do you see any sign or any inkling of that gap somewhat shrinking, between affordability and people's incomes?
Right. And it's a major challenge, right? And Indiana's not alone in facing it. A good chunk of the country is grappling with the same issue, because we were underbuilding for so long coming out of the last downturn. And, then when COVID hit and the pandemic hit, everybody thought kind of the world would stop, but there was still a lot of pent up demand for home construction and or remodeling projects. And so that kind of further exasperated the challenge moving forward. And there's, and certainly most areas of the state of Indiana, there was no inventory on the market,
right,
new or existing, which, further pushed home prices up. And, we've got to get that back in balance. And it doesn't help today that, mortgage rates are, somewhere between 6 and 8%, and that even squeezes a lot more potential buyers out of the market because they can't qualify. You talked about affordability, and you raised a great point, right? Because what's affordable to you and what's affordable to me and the person down the street is all different depending on how much house we want to buy and how much house we can afford. We look at it at the state level that, we're going to push for affordable housing at every price point. And because the average consumer, what do, right? They call their real estate agent, or they call their mortgage professional, and they say, okay, we're looking at buying a house, and how much do we qualify for? And so most people, human nature, that if they qualify for X, that's the price point that they're going to look for the house for.
Yeah, and try to push that.
Right. And so we know that, whether you're building a $400,000 house, a $600,000 house, or $1 million house, there's going to be people that get priced out if regulations become too high. And, the national levels will tell you right now that about 25% of the cost of a new home goes towards regulations at the local, state, and federal level. And I like to tell people that's no sticks and that's no bricks on a house. That's just government cost to build a home, whether it's permit fees, environmental regulations, building code requirements, energy efficiency requirements. Those are all costs that have to go into the house, and it makes it that much less affordable.
Right.
What do what can we do? Government got out of the infrastructure business back around the end of World War II, as our communities started growing out into the suburbs and housing was plentiful. There was a lot of construction going on and costs were relatively low at the time. Government was incentivizing, right, our GIs coming home to buy a home in some cases. And so there was a lot of growth out of the cities and into the suburbs. Builders and developers started paying for that infrastructure.
Right.
And infrastructure, I mean roads, streets, sidewalks, sewer, water infrastructure. And we could do that back then. We're getting to the point now where if builders have to continue to front the bill on all that infrastructure and ultimately roll it into the cost of a lot and roll it into the cost of a new home, that's when you get to the challenge of home prices being so high and a lot of Hoosiers unable to afford a new home. And so, the General Assembly realized that and provided a $75 million residential infrastructure fund in the last session of the Indiana General Assembly to say, okay, we've got a problem. We've got a challenge. How can we help maybe drive down the cost of that infrastructure and let builders and developers partner with their local government officials to say, let's identify some areas where we can build more houses and maybe offset some of that infrastructure cost so that we can bring housing in at a more attainable price. And so we're excited about it. The applications are going to be going live here soon. And we think it's really going to spur a lot of activity in areas that maybe couldn't build at a price that consumers in that area could afford. And we think that it's really going to help the state of Indiana continue to grow. I mean, we're doing a great job in Indiana of attracting residents from other states, surrounding states, and all across the country. We're bringing in a lot of new jobs and a lot of new investment. We just got to make sure we have a place for them to live at a price they can afford. And so that's what we're working hard to make sure that Indiana is still well positioned to bring in folks from other areas and other states to live in Indiana, because historically we've been a great place to live, work, raise a family, and we've had a low cost of living, and we want to make sure we preserve that.
Right. No, and when you referenced or talked about areas that kind of need new construction, but really couldn't support the new construction $400,000 prices, just here locally, I think about, cities like the East Chicagos, Gary's, the Hammonds, primarily, Gary. Gary is a city, I know you're, you know, not from Gary, of course, but know enough about Gary to know Gary
Correct.
has had its share of challenges for various reasons. But that whole our whole North Lake County, is kind of where this region was birthed, but a lot of the growth started going south, to Maryville, Cherville's, Dyers, Crown Points, Winfields, places like that, where the prices are much more expensive. But those areas still need some new life. They need some new blood. The housing stock in your East Chicago's, Gary's, and Hammond, most of it was built in the 40s, 50s, some 60s and 70s, but a lot of it was built in those 40s and 50s. So a bill like that, do you envision it, being able to help assist doing some new construction in cities like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I hope that's, where some of our communities have been challenged, but are well positioned to be able to grow, that they can take advantage of a program like this and maybe spur some additional economic activity.
Mhm.
Because if the rooftops are there, right, and your local supermarket, they don't just build a supermarket and hope that there's enough consumers
Right.
there to buy the bread and eggs and milk that they sell. They look at the number of rooftops that are around that area, and that's where they locate. So we know if we can get the rooftops in and we can get some of the commercial development in, a lot of other things will follow. And you're exactly right, right? North Lake County, you know, so well positioned on the lake,
Yep.
so well positioned to the major, a
Interstate.
major city like Chicago and its metropolitan area that, you know, if it can get jump started, right, there's a lot of great things that could happen in a lot of those communities around the lake.
Definitely agree. Another big incentive here is we got the train that is, the West Lake Corridor extension, double tracking. So, I mean, making it even quicker for people to get back and forth from Chicago. So, definitely agree with you on that for sure, for sure. So, we talked about the affordability piece. And I mean, that is something, and I just even going back to, dealing with East Chicago, diversity of housing, because a lot of people think traditionally, when you talk about home ownership, it's just your single family home. But I mean, there are multiple types of properties, that you go on there. I mean, there's a townhome, there's condos, there's condos. I actually represented myself and my team lead, Nancy Frigo. We represented the first condo development that had ever really taken place in North Lake County. The city of East Chicago built they were almost townhomes because they were 2 stories, but they were condos. They were actually 7 condos with 3 commercial spaces at the bottom. And you wouldn't believe the challenge we had. People were interested, once we got them priced right, but appraisers, we received a hard time from appraisers, because this was so brand new of a concept. Now going forward, yeah, it shouldn't be as difficult, but coming out the gate, it was very challenging.
Sure. Yeah. And that's the challenge that, a lot of communities face right now, right? Because we've now gone through, 40, 50 years of building out communities kind of in one way. And that's
Yeah.
the traditional suburb where your commercial corridors are in one part and then the residential component is, in another area of the town and never shall the two meet, right? And that's not the way a lot of our cities were built back in the, early 1900s and, where you had apartments or townhouses or condos right next to a single family home and folks walk down the street to get their groceries instead of driving 10 minutes or 15 minutes to the commercial corridor. And so I think this housing affordability challenge really presents an opportunity for communities to say, how can we address the challenge in maybe a different way than we have done for decades? And
Mhm.
how, is it okay in our community for a apartment complex to be right next door to single family homes? And is it okay for a restaurant or a commercial business to be on a lower floor and there be apartments above it? And right, consumers have to get comfortable with that, and elected officials have to get comfortable with that as well and say, we need housing options in our community that are varied and at various price points so that we can attract a young professional to our community. And if they have a job and they're making wages, they may start in an apartment, but they may end up living in a single family home or a townhouse, depending on what their preference is. And we want to make sure we have all those options available to them so they stay in our community and continue to pay taxes in our community.
Right, right. No, 100%. I'm just curious, from a state level, even potentially a national level, what are you seeing as far as preferences of of consumers, and whether it's new housing to purchase or even, new apartments? What kind of are some of the amenities slash features that you're seeing the consumers really, really, really look for, in new housing developments?
Yeah, I think, we've touched on a couple of them, and that's community amenities. Number one, right? Buyers today are looking at walkability, livability, right? Is there a coffee shop? Is there a deli or a restaurant where they can walk to? Is there jogging trails or walking trails or bike paths available that they can exercise outside in their community? Are huge, community attractions. And those, that interest is going to continue to grow, I think, and that quality of life, right? A lot of people are now working from home more, or they're working remote. So they want to be able to get outside their house at some point and go exercise or go do, a community activity that's close to where they're living. So, that's a huge driver of how communities are being looked at and laid out today. Are those amenities available in the respective community? Inside the house, the square footage is continuing to drop. Some of that's by consumer preference. It grew for a couple of years during COVID when everybody in the house was home and everybody was like, I need more space. Now, coming out of the pandemic, where maybe kids are back at school, and, maybe they're home working part of the week, but not the whole week anymore. That square footage preference has dropped a little bit, but they still want a home office. They still want outdoor living area in their home where they can get outside the house and enjoy something. So a deck or a screened in porch or high preference items right now that just expands the footprint of the house a little bit and gives them another area to enjoy their living experience.
Gotcha. Gotcha. No, we've talked about the pandemic, and the pandemic had tremendous effects, on every walk of life, economy. I mean, people's health. I mean, it had tremendous effects. But coming out of that, it definitely shifted certain sectors, in the real estate market. One primarily being office. The office space is really in turmoil right now. I mean, there are several office buildings and and I'm sure you all are experiencing it in Indianapolis, downtown Indy. Because you have the big government center, things like that. I mean,
Right.
people are still active, but I could think of, downtown Chicago. Several very well known restaurants are closing their doors. A lot of the quote unquote high rises in Chicago, have floors upon floors that are just vacant, right now. From an association perspective, what opportunity do you think that presents, to our, home builders and multifamily developers, things like that? Or do you even think that is an opportunity that could be capitalized on right now?
Yeah, that challenge is, got multiple layers to it. There are vacant buildings that are being looked at for conversions. However, there are challenges depending on how the office building is laid out. Could an office building be converted to multifamily? In some cases, yes. In some cases, no, without significant assistance. Because you think about a traditional office building, there's bathrooms are in the middle by the elevators. And so they weren't laid out to then spread bathrooms out to put 10 apartments on a floor, right? And so, there are some challenges there to retrofitting a building to make it work from a traditional office space to a residential space. But in some instances, builders, developers, and local government officials are finding ways to make that work and incentivizing some of that conversion to occur. I think cities, towns, communities that may have seen an exodus of workers out of those office buildings and leaving some of those buildings vacant, if they're not finding ways to attract residents back into town, they're going to continue to lose those restaurants and the vibrancy, right, that the downtown office worker gave a city or a town because they were eating lunch out or they had meetings after work, that helped keep those restaurants open. So now, if some of those workers aren't going to come back or not coming back on a 5-day work week, how do you keep those other businesses open? And that means you got to bring residents into town. So, whether you can convert the building or not is one challenge, but if you can't, can you open up other areas for more apartments to be built, more townhouses to be built? So you get people walking the streets again, and you're able to, keep those dining and retail establishments open because you got a customer base.
Gotcha. Well, Rick, this has definitely been a great conversation. I'm going to throw one last question at you, then I am going to let you go. With your longtime association with the Indiana Homebuilders Association, you've seen many developers, some good, probably some not so good, in all walks of life. What are, if you had to give just a few characteristics or qualities, what are some of the most important qualities that you've seen to make somebody be a successful developer?
Yep. I think developers, builders, right, contractors, the best attribute is hard work, right? These folks are gamblers by nature, right? They're putting their
good way of saying it.
Yeah. They're putting their families' investments, right, life savings on the line to build a subdivision or build an apartment complex. And that's what it takes in a lot of cases, right? So they've got to have that intestinal fortitude to be willing to take a risk. And then they got to have the ability to work hard every day to make sure that huge gamble, that huge risk, that huge investment will pay off in the back end. And, most of these builders, developers all across the state and the country, they're building homes, they're building subdivisions in the communities they live in.
Right.
And, they take pride in that, right? They want to bring a good product to the market that they'll be proud of, and that the homeowners that buy those lots and the builders that build those homes on those lots are going to be proud of, and something that they can drive through and say, look at what we've created. We've given this family, right, an opportunity to have their own home and be successful in it. And, they take great pride in that. And that's where the real payoff is seeing their hard work come to fruition and seeing a lot of young families be able to grow up in a subdivision or a home that they built.
Awesome. Well, Rick, I definitely want to, again, thank you for your time, your graciousness, your wisdom, your knowledge, your expertise is invaluable. I definitely appreciate you for joining us again. If people would like to get in touch with you or even learn more about the Indiana Homebuilders Association or the National Homebuilders Association, what would be the best resources for them to potentially get you and even learn more about the association?
If they can go to our website, www.buildindiana.org. It's our website. It has a lot of information regarding the housing industry on it. It also has links to our local associations all across the state, as well as our National Association of Home Builders. So there's a lot of good information on the housing industry on those websites. I would encourage your listeners to check us out.
Awesome. Again, this has been another episode of the Wealth and Real Estate Development Podcast. We've had an awesome guest in Mr. Rick Wajda, the CEO of the Indiana Homebuilders Association. Definitely hope you all have learned something. As a matter of fact, I know you all have learned something, gotten some good information, valuable information from this podcast. So I definitely encourage you again to like, share, subscribe, help us grow this message and help us bring some more developers, remodelers, contractors, and electricians, all of that to the industry. Again, this is the Wealth and Real Estate Development Podcast, better known as WIRED. This is where we build wealthy communities, wealthy families, wealthy individuals through real estate development. I am your host, Nick Smith, signing off again for this episode. Let's go get wired up. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, please share this content with someone else who would benefit from it. I'm looking forward to having you with me on the next episode. Now go out and create some wealth and real estate development.